is the podcast Reading the Middle East, where we take a deep dive with all the authors and thought leaders who are shaping how we think about this complex and dynamic region. I'm your host, Gilles Kepel, professor at Sciences Po and author of a number of books and articles about Islam and the Middle East. This week, my guest is the renowned Egyptian novelist Alaa Al Aswany, author of numerous highly regarded novels, short stories and articles, including the award-winning Yacoubian Building, and most recently, The Republic of False Truths, released in English this year, which will be the subject of our conversation today. The Republic of False Truths is a fictionalized account of the Arab Spring uprising in Egypt, with an array of characters from Egyptian society. Alaa was a participant in the demonstrations at Tahrir Square, and his book provides a brilliant, if dispiriting, account of Egypt's Arab Spring. Hello, Dr. Alaa.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. And I'm always happy to be with you, Professor Kepel. Alan Big.
Well, Dr. Alaa, you were there at Tahrir Square in 2011. Before we got into the book and its vivid characters, what did you take from the demonstrations and the crowd that both surprised and dismayed? And how do you, in a general way, look back at those events which occurred now 10 years ago?
Well, the 18 days of the revolution were the best days of my life. And I think that anybody who joined this revolution would say the same thing. It was simply too good to be true. And during the 18 days, I had twice the idea that probably I was dreaming. I spoke in public thousands of times, but I spoke in public in the Tahrir Square every night. The idea, the feeling you have when you talk to 1 million people, sometimes 2 million people, willing to die for freedom, it's quite different. It's very different. So the Egyptians I lived with in the Tahrir Square have nothing to do with the Egyptians I used to live with before the revolution. They are probably the same people, but something happened, and this something is great, unique, and accordingly, I had the feeling while I lived this experience that I'm gonna write a novel. And I needed time because, as you know, Professor Kepel, the difference between journalism and fiction. In journalism, you can write actuality, you can write on the very same day, but in fiction, you need a distance in time and in feelings. And I had this distance, and I began writing the novel 5 years after the revolution.
Well, thank you, Dr. Alaa. But actually, in reading The Republic of False Truths, I was struck by your insistence on the role of the military top brass in the Egyptian revolution of 2011. Those people that actually, when you were there, you did not see, but they were behind the scenes, right? And this military top brass is impersonated in your novel in one of your central characters, General Ahmed Alwani, with whom the novel opens, and who is very carefully crafted throughout the pages. I got the feeling that you depict him and the symbol that he represents as, as if he were someone who managed to manipulate most political, religious, media, social, and even militant actors from the very inception of the upheaval. Something that runs contrary to common wisdom on the narrative or even on the legend of the Arab Spring, and even to maybe the impression that you so vividly depicted that you had when you were there addressing the crowds. And as one gets deeper and deeper into your book, we increasingly feel that the young revolutionaries lived under the illusion that they were making history, but actually they were caught between, let's say, the hammer of the army and the anvil of a people, quote unquote, on whose behalf they were demonstrating, though the people, and this is what you show page after page in your book, became indifferent, if not hostile at the end. Would you say that this is how you see the situation in retrospect today, after you had worked on your fictional book, as opposed to what you felt at the time?
We learned many lessons. Of course, the revolution, like any other revolution, we make mistakes and we should learn from our mistakes. And I believe a big mistake done by the revolutionaries, is that we thought at some point that the Tahrir Square represents Egypt in full, all of the whole country. This is not true. You know, we were like 10 to 20% of the population, and you have on the other side people who are defending the old regime. I gave them 10%. And you have in between a very dangerous mass. I call it the passive mass. And you know, in Egypt we call them the sofa party, because they Hizb al-Kanaba, they sat on the sofa and they watch TV and they never join anything. So what happened is the counter-revolution succeeded, unfortunately, to convince the sofa party that the revolution is something very bad and it shouldn't have happened. This happened before, as you know, in many revolutions. I take the French Revolution as a model, and after 10 years in France, the situation was catastrophic. So this is what happened. We should learn our lessons as revolutionaries, but I'm very optimistic because the future is on our side. The counter-revolution has everything, has weapons, has the media, has the army, has the police, and we have our dream of the revolution of justice and freedom, and we have our courage and our willing to sacrifice. But in the long run, I'm quite sure, to me, it goes without saying, we will overcome. That's why I'm optimistic. Another point about General Alwany. General Alwany is representing for me not only the old regime, but the religious hypocrisy. We have a very peculiar practice of religion in Egypt. I learned, when I was a kid, I learned Arabic and French on the very same day, and I am a pupil, a student of the French culture and civilization. And we have Molière, who presented a wonderful character, Tartuffe. Of course, you don't need to know who is Tartuffe, you're teaching this. But we have a difference, because Tartuffe was somebody who was pretending to be religious and at the same time doing bad things. Our problem in Egypt, and I would say in the Arab world, that we have Tartuffes that believe in what they are doing. And there is a big difference.
If you look behind the scenes that you suggest we do, one of the red threads of the Republic of False Truths is sex, something that Tartuffe was very much indulgent to himself. The book actually opens with a very crude and Molière-esque way, to some extent, depiction of General Alwany's intercourse with his wife, where he mixes pornography with religion. And just let me read a couple of lines from your novel so that people know what you're talking about. So, you write, some might ask, how could a God-fearing Muslim like General Alwany watch pornographic films? Well, a foolish question that only ignoramuses or the malevolent could entertain. It is true that watching pornography is an act disapproved of by religion, but it is not considered a major sin like murder, fornication, or the consumption of alcohol. The true religion may allow on occasion the commission of an act that is disapproved of if it prevents the believer from committing a greater sin, in accordance with the legal principle that, quote unquote, necessity permits the prohibited. So would you say, and following up on your Tartuffe metaphor, that your depiction of sexual relations in the Egypt of 2011 functions as a way as an analyzer or as a metaphor of the relations of power that are displayed to the extremes by political manipulation on the one hand, and that also are able to bring hope for a better future on the other hand?
Yes, of course. This is not only 2011. You're absolutely right. The point is, if we stop thinking of the sexual relation as a taboo or just a physical pleasure, we will find a very rich human domain. People, anybody, performs sex for many reasons. He or she would perform sex because he is scared, because he is looking for a mother, because he is trying to explore or to discover his partner, for many reasons. And that's why the sexual, and I even prefer to call it the physical relation, has been a very rich domain in the world literature. I'm not the only writer who focused on the sexual relation as an indicator about the characters and the human attitudes. I did what all the Greek writers did, like Garcia Marquez, Isabella Allende, Dostoevsky, many Balzac, many Greek writers. So I try to explain the human attitude, the human feelings through the description of the physical relation.
You know, the Republic of False Truth reminded me to quite an extent the Yacoubian Building volume, that the masterpiece that made you so famous and that came out in 2002, if I remember. So I wonder to what extent this new novel, The Republic of False Truth, has in a way that kind of same virtue of example, i.e. it encapsulates all the bitter lessons of a terrible situation where immense hopes were actually betrayed by so many. And if such is the case, could you tell us how you see, in the light of this very novel, a better future for Egypt and for the whole region after the lessons of the Arab Spring and its aftermath have been drawn from a distance and also through the very special lenses of fiction?
Well, thank you very much first. And second, of course, I believe that there is something, probably, most probably, there is something in my, this novel, in my latest novel, that could be useful for people to understand what happened in the Arab Spring. And as I said before, I'm really optimistic. I believe we will overcome. It takes time. We just need time. We were between, according to the CNN, we were between 10 and 20 million people. So Egypt is 100 million people. But we are still there. The regime sent to prison thousands of people. But we're still there, and we will never give up our dream, because the revolution in the first place is a dream. And something happened in Egypt, even if it's not visible to the regime. Something happened. Egypt now is no more Egypt it used to be. And what happened is irreversible. No, we will never be the way we used to be. So I'm very optimistic about the future of Egypt. We don't have to forget that 60% of Egyptians are under the age of 35. It means that in 10 years, 20 years, all the old guards of the corrupt regime will disappear, and the young people will take over. Accordingly, the future is ours.
Well, yourself and some in your family also now live in the United States, have fled the Middle East. Under what conditions do you think that a Middle East novelist like yourself, but there are many others also, a number of artists, for instance, could come back to the region? And what kind of future do you think you can deal with facing new challenges in this very peculiar period when we're talking, which came after the book was written, of course, which we saw recently, such as the return of the Taliban to Kabul, for instance, precipitated by the US pullout from the region and the growing disinterest of the West for what happens in the Middle East?
Well, as soon as Mr. Sisi came to power, 2014 officially, he became the president. I was banned from writing. I was banned from any TV appearance. There was a terrible media campaign against me, accusing me, of course, the classic accusations of being, sometimes they went too far. They accused me of being a CIA agent, Mossad agent, and in the same time they accused me of being an Irani agent. And you know, Professor Kepel, that it doesn't work simply. You cannot be you cannot be an agent for Israel and Iran at the same time. So it was a kind of character assassination, right? And then after that, they began to make troubles with my family. They made a case against my daughter, and she was sentenced to prison for no reason. And that's when I decided to quit, to flee Egypt. But it's very simple for any writer, I believe. I cannot live in a place where I cannot write what I want, you see. And this is a must for any writer. And I must say that I'm not praising Mubarak, of course, right? He was a terrible dictator too, but the version, we have been ruled by military dictatorship since 1952 with different versions. The version we have now is the worst, is the most terrible. So under Mubarak, I was allowed to write what I want. And I believe that writing for any writer is like oxygen. So if somebody doesn't have oxygen, he cannot respire, accordingly, he must leave. And this is the most important thing for me.
But what would be the conditions for you to come back, would you say?
To come back for good is to write, to be able to write whatever I want. You know, of course, I would love to, if they will stop to make troubles with me and my family, I will be happy to go over there to spend 2 or 3 months. But to stay for good, I must be allowed to write what I want. No restrictions, no censorship, no punishment, no ban, nothing.
Well, thank you very much for this very illuminating exchange between the two of us. We're going to keep it short because it's the iron law of the podcast, because people turn off, and I'm sure they won't, and I'm sure they will also go and rush to the bookstores to read your Republic of False Truth, الجمهورية كأنه, as you said in Arabic. Dr. Alaa, thank you for this book and thank you for this interview. It's been my pleasure to host you.
Thank you, Professor
as the
Kepel.
very first guest on Reading the Middle East. مش الأسواني بس الأولاني. And thank you all for listening to us. I'll be back in a few weeks with another one of the top authors and thought leaders of the Middle East. And please sign us for Reading the Middle East in our All Al Monitor podcast on the Middle East with Andrew Paraziliti and Amber Inzaman, and also on Israel with Ben Caspit at your favorite podcast platform. Goodbye. Forza Saida.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you like this podcast and care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's other audio series, On the Middle East with Andrew Parasaliti and Amber Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspit. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.